Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm George and I'm here in sunny Arizona. We're in Papago Park. We've got this lovely bit of water with some palm trees, a sort of oasis in the desert, and then we've got these mountains in the background. So I think this scene just looks like quite a nice, peaceful scene to paint. I always like painting water into a painting. It helps add some balance to the composition between the lights in the sky and the lights in the foreground. It's normally quite a safe bet when you're trying to find a good composition to paint. If it's got water in the foreground, you're probably onto something which is going to look quite nice in a painting. I'm painting quite a lot smaller than normal, and part of the reason for that is I've used most of the panels that I brought with me to America. But also I want to do more paintings, I want to do quicker paintings, as some of the light effect in the evening here is so beautiful, especially sunset and twilight. So my plan is not just to do one painting in a day, but to do 2 or maybe 3 paintings in a day. The smaller the panel, the quicker it is to cover it, the quicker it is to paint. Let's start painting. Please do subscribe to my channel and let's go.
I've toned my canvas to a dull yellow ground using raw umber paint and yellow ochre that I've thinned down using terps and rubbed into my canvas. Using thinned down ultramarine paint, I'm now dividing my canvas into a grid, as this will help me get the vertical and horizontal relationships of the shapes in the scene more accurately by referencing them against these lines. With a scene like this, which has a lot of trees, it's important to get their positions accurately and also make sure that the reflections line up correctly underneath. As I paint these palm trees, I measure their width against their height, as well as the distance between the trees in relation to their height. I do this by holding my paintbrush up to the scene. I have my arm outstretched and hold the brush upside down so my hand is near the base. From there I close one eye and take measurements by lining the end of my brush up with a certain point and then moving my thumb up or down to line up with the bottom of the object. To compare these measurements, I keep my thumb in the same place and move my brush over different sections of the scene to see how they compare. When doing this, it's important to keep your body in the same position and your arm completely outstretched, as any movement backwards or forwards will completely throw off the measurement. Using these comparative measurement techniques, I'm able to draw a proportionally accurate scene. As I paint these trees, I start by painting the shadow shapes, using a colour mix of ultramarine blue and raw umber paint. I'm leaving the sections in light as just the initial imprimatur of the canvas for now. I like to keep the shadows thin and build up the lights with thicker paint. I also try to avoid painting dark paint over light paint or light paint over dark paint where possible, because as I'm painting wet into wet paint, the paint layers will mix, dulling down the colour and value of the paint. Another technique I use to help get everything in position accurately is by observing the negative shapes within the scene, such as the spaces between the trees, and seeing what abstract shape they form. By really looking at the character of this shape in nature and then checking it compared to what I've painted on my canvas and adjusting it accordingly, it helps me paint the scene more accurately, as there's a tendency to paint details that we don't consider important to be smaller, and things that we find more interesting, we subconsciously paint them bigger. So it's good to focus on the negative shapes as well as the objects we're painting, in this case here being the palm trees. I also find it helps to squint at the scene and to try and simplify the trees into a general mass of tonal value, rather than getting fixated on each individual tree at this stage. Now that I've mapped in the position of the trees, I'm starting to paint in the sky. I use a colour mix consisting mostly of titanium white and cerulean blue, as well as a touch of ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. And as the sky gets higher up, I add more ultramarine blue to my colour mix. I'm now repainting the shadows in the trees with a more chromatic green for the foliage. I'm using a colour mix of ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow and a small touch of cadmium red just to tone down the chroma of the green slightly. And of this colour combination, the colour that I've added most to my mix is ultramarine blue, making this mix a cool green in terms of colour temperature. Once I've painted in the shadow pattern, I'm now painting in the areas of foliage which are catching the sunlight. To do this, I use a colour mix consisting mostly of cadmium yellow and yellow ochre, as well as some ultramarine blue and titanium white. The sections in light are lighter in tonal value than the shadows, and also warmer in colour temperature, as the sun is a warm light source. Also, the shadows are receiving some reflected light from the blue sky, which makes the greens in the shadow cooler in colour temperature. Here I'm using a round brush with a fine point to paint a few dabs of the light sky colour that are breaking through the leaves on the palm trees. As I paint this mountain on the left hand side, I start by painting in the shadow shapes, and as this mountain is a warm reddish colour, the shadows have a purplish hue, so I use a mix of ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson and yellow ochre with a small touch of titanium white. And to paint the lights, I use a colour mix of cadmium red, yellow ochre and a touch of raw umber and titanium white. So similar to what I mentioned in the trees, as the sections in light are receiving sunlight, which is a warm light source, they're going to be warmer in colour temperature, and the shadows are going to be a bit cooler as they're receiving some reflected light from the blue sky. Although there will be sections within the shadows which are redder, which are receiving reflected light from other sections of the rock. so you really have to observe the colour shifts within the shadows, as the shadows are never going to be one complete colour. There's going to be little sections of different colours. But one thing you do want to try and keep control of is keep the value range in the shadows quite unified. As I paint these reflections, I try and mirror the colours which are in the trees. However, one thing to note is that the colours in the reflection will be a bit less chromatic and the tonal values a bit darker with less contrast than those that they're reflecting. As due to the nature of reflections, the reflected image will never be quite as bright and chromatic. The same rule applies to the reflection of the sky and the water, and this blue reflection in the water also becomes a bit darker and a warmer blue as it gets closer to the foreground.
So I've finished the painting now. It's been really hot. I've had the heat on my back and not much breeze either, which has been nice to paint. It's meant the water stayed pretty still throughout. If you do like the video, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Give me a super thanks if you're feeling generous. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.